bought by the Alpha. The market square was a cacophony of noise, shouts, haggling, and the occasional cruel laughter that sent shivers down my spine. I crouched in the shadows, clutching the tattered remains of my shawl, trying to shield myself from the biting chill and the leering gazes of men who saw me as little more than prey. My pack was gone, scattered to the winds after a brutal raid. It had been a clear night when they came, wolves from a rival pack, their howls echoing through the forest like a death knell. They tore through our defenses with precision, their warriors stronger and more ruthless than any of us had anticipated. Fires engulfed our dens as chaos erupted. I remembered the acrid stench of smoke filling my lungs and the panicked screams of my packmates as they fell one by one. My so-called step-parents had been among the first to be slaughtered. I'd found my stepmother's lifeless body in the clearing where we used to gather, her eyes staring blankly at the sky. My stepfather's fate was no less cruel. He'd been cut down trying to my stepmother. The sight of his blood staining the ground would haunt me forever. I had no time to mourn, no time to process the devastation. The attackers rounded up the survivors, chaining those who weren't killed outright. Even if I had escaped, it wouldn't have mattered. Nobody in the pack would have cared. Since losing my real parents as a pup, I had been treated as little more than a servant, a burden to be ignored or ordered around by my step-parents. I had no allies, no one to miss me or fight for me. Alone, barely connected to my wolf Asina, I could not shift and run away. Instead, I was captured and sold to a traveling merchant who dealt in the misery of others. We traveled for days shackled with silver cuffs and attached to a heavy chain. The merchant's first stop was always a local healer to inspect his goods. Claimed it was to ensure we were in sellable condition, but his true motives became clear soon enough. The healer's cursory examinations revealed that I, along with another girl named Mira, a quiet, timid shifter who had also been bullied relentlessly in her old pack, were virgins. This discovery lit a greedy spark in the merchant's eyes, and he immediately decided to keep us separate from the others, placing us in a group he called his prized offerings. Meanwhile, another girl who had once been the daughter of a beta and one of my worst tormentors was deemed unworthy of the higher bidders. The healer had disclosed her flaw, and the merchant callously decided her fate. She would be sold to a notorious brothel that catered to the vilest clientele. The shock and fear in her eyes as she was dragged away lingered in my mind, even as Mira and I were ushered into a separate cart, our fates no less uncertain. The journey from the healer to the auction block was both surreal and terrifying. Mira and I were loaded into a separate cart, one far more luxurious than the others, its padded interior and heavy curtains a stark contrast to the horrors we had just endured. But the comfort only made the situation more ominous. We were prized items now, and that made our fates even more uncertain. The merchant's lackeys kept a watchful eye on us, their leering gazes making my skin crawl. Mira sat beside me, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of her dress. "What do you think they're going to do to us?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the creaking wheels. I shook my head, unable to form a coherent answer. "I don't know," I replied, my throat dry. "But whatever it is, it can't be good." She bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. I just want this to be over." I didn't have the heart to tell her that over didn't mean freedom. It meant being sold to someone who would see us as possessions, not people. My wolf stirred uneasily within me, her restless energy both a comfort and a torment. The cart jolted to a stop, and the fear in my chest solidified into a cold, hard lump as the handlers barked at us to get out. That's how I ended up here, on the auction block, surrounded by other virgins like me. Shifters who had lost their freedom, their families, and their dignity. Most of them still had the fight in their eyes, but I was different. My wolf, my fierce, untamed half, was barely there. The connection between us was weak, a thread fraying at the edges. I could feel her pacing inside me now, restless for the first time in years. It was strange, but I had no time to dwell on it as the handler yanked me to my feet. "On your feet, girl," he growled. His hand tightened painfully around my arm, and I bit back a whimper. "You're up next." I stumbled onto the stage, blinking under the harsh glare of the torches. The jeers and whistles from the crowd made my stomach churn. We were paraded like cattle, meat to be sold to the highest bidder. Obligation forced me to dance, to move in a way that didn't reveal how humiliated I truly felt. My bare feet scraped against the rough wood as I swayed, my gaze fixed on a point in the distance, avoiding the hungry stares below. "Lot 34, the auctioneer bellowed, his voice cutting through the din. "A rare beauty, if a bit unpolished. But don't let that fool you. She's a wolf shifter, young and malleable." Malleable. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. My wolf stirred again, and this time, her presence was stronger. I could feel her anger bubbling beneath the surface. It was better than the emptiness, but it also terrified me. What if she snapped? What if she dragged us both into something we couldn't escape? And then I heard it.
"What are you doing up there, little mate?"
The voice was dark, dominant, and so shockingly intimate that I froze mid-step. My heart raced as I scanned the crowd, panic surging through me. When my eyes locked with his, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. He stood at the back, towering over everyone else. His presence was magnetic, commanding attention even though he remained silent. Long, dark brown hair framed a face that was all hard lines and masculine beauty. His amber honey-colored eyes burned into mine with a mixture of fury and something deeper, something that made my knees weaken. He was the most handsome brute of a man I had ever seen, and his aura screamed one thing: alpha. The auctioneer's voice droned on, oblivious to the silent exchange between us. "Do I hear 50 gold? 50 gold for the girl?" The bids started rolling in, but I barely registered them. My gaze was locked with his, and I could feel his presence in my mind, a warm, insistent pressure that made my wolf howl. His voice rumbled in my head. "You're mine now." The bidding war escalated, and the tension in the air was palpable. I wanted to run, to hide, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. Then, just as the auctioneer raised his hammer to seal the deal for some greasy merchant, the alpha's voice cut through the chaos.
200 gold.
A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The merchant spluttered, clearly unwilling to match the outrageous sum. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed with greed as he slammed the hammer down. "Sold!" The alpha pushed through the throng with predatory grace, his eyes never leaving mine. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. When he reached the stage, he didn't wait for the handlers to release me. With a snarl, he snapped the chain binding my wrists as if it were paper and pulled me into his arms. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down my spine. But safety felt like a foreign concept. I stared up at him, trembling, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The alpha's gaze softened slightly, and he brushed a strand of hair from my face. His touch was surprisingly gentle for someone so dominant, and it made my heart ache in a way I didn't understand. "Let's get out of here," he said, wrapping his cloak around my shoulders. The warmth was a stark contrast to the icy fear that had gripped me moments before. He led me away from the auction block, his hand firm but not unkind on my arm. The crowd's noise faded into the background as we entered the dimly lit alleyways of the town. My mind raced with questions, but I couldn't bring myself to voice them. Who was he? Why had he bought me? And most importantly, why did my wolf, the wolf I had barely felt for years, suddenly feel so alive in his presence? As if sensing my turmoil, he stopped and turned to face me. "You must be wondering why I'm doing this." I nodded, unable to meet his intense gaze. "Because you're my mate, little wolf," he said simply. "My second chance mate." The words hit me like a thunderclap. I staggered back, my mind reeling. Mates were rare, sacred. To lose one was a tragedy, but to find a second chance, it was almost unheard of. My heart raced as I struggled to process what he had said. I stammered, shaking my head. "I'm not." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You are," he said firmly. "I felt it the moment I saw you. And your wolf knows it too." My wolf. Asina's presence surged within me, stronger than it had been in years. She didn't resist him. Instead, she seemed to lean into his aura, basking in it like sunlight. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Why me?" I whispered. "I'm nothing. My pack is gone. My wolf is—" "Your wolf is here," he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. And so are you. Whatever you've been through, it doesn't matter now. You're mine, and I take care of what's mine. Tears welled in my eyes, and I looked away, ashamed of my vulnerability. But he didn't let me retreat. His hand tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his gaze. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elara," I whispered. "Elara," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "I'm Ezra, Alpha of the Crescent Moon Pack." Ezra. The name suited him, strong, commanding, unyielding. He took my hand, his touch grounding me in a way I hadn't thought possible. "Come with me," he said. "I'll give you a home. I'll help you heal, Elara. And together, we'll make those who wronged you pay." His words ignited something in me, a spark of hope I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have a future worth living for. I nodded, a tentative smile breaking through my tears. "Okay." Ezra's answering smile was devastatingly handsome, and as he led me away from the darkness of my past, I felt my wolf stir with newfound strength. Asena and I were finally home,